Hi everyone, Anna's here and welcome to our weekly money date. I wanted to hop on and chat with you today about my very favorite topic of all, and I talk about it a lot, but I'm doing a webinar tomorrow on how can you get your money to flow. So presenting to a group of investors, and the big question that everyone has, and I think it would be relevant to all of you too, is because not only we live in an environment where our income varies, right? But then a lot of us have investments that give us income, but it's not steady. So for example, if you have real estate investments, right? Or mutual stocks and mutual funds, that's not an investment. Mutual funds, stocks, bonds, and so forth. So your income could be fluctuating. So as I was preparing for this webinar, I kind of wanted to maybe share with you a few thoughts that I have that I'm going to be going to discuss tomorrow. And if you're interested, I shared a link on our Main Street page. Hi Cynthia, how are you? It's a hot day in Burlingame, and check it out tomorrow. It's at 10 o'clock Pacific in the morning, and it's free to attend if you want to hear me talk a little more details. But the idea I have for you today is this. If you know this kind of notion that talks about that cash is king, right? We all kind of hear those things. If you have cash, all things are possible, which is very true. But I want to challenge you to think about that cash flow is king. And we know cash flow is queen. And we know what happens when queens become in charge of things. No, that's not what I want you to think about. But I want you to think about the fact that just because you don't have a ton of cash doesn't mean you can't make things work. And that's where having proper structures to make sure whether you're on variable income or you have a paycheck that comes in every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, or monthly, allows you to create that system. So my idea of money flow is all about that. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of details of how the system works, but the very high detail level would be to make sure that you understand how to properly account for what your fixed expenses are and your variable. And so I'm showing with my hands, but I usually set up 2 checking accounts, right? So one pays for fixed expenses, another pays for variable expenses. And so that way I can see pretty clearly myself, what is my fixed spend? Because then that becomes really all on auto pay, as fixed expenses almost never change. Examples of fixed expenses: your mortgage, your rent payments, car payments, right? Savings and debt payments are also part of my fixed expense side of things, because that my expenses my savings get accomplished and my debts, right? If I have any debts, get paid off. This is one of the ways to make sure that your debts get eliminated. And then the right-hand side, right, or checking account number 2 would be for all the variable expenses that are out there. Now, some of us define variable differently, but at the very least, can you make sure that, right, like your groceries or restaurants, eating out, or whatever variable spend is separate. Now, it creates a lot more flexibility in terms of seeing, right? So some of us struggle with the fact that we don't really have a sense where the money's going. And Cynthia, my colleague, could attend to that. That's what a lot of people struggle with, right? That's why they seek financial planners, because they want to at least figure out those things, right? Which in turn don't have to be stressful. So this is really where it comes down to. How do you put together a system that gives you more of that flexibility and creates less stress? Because let's face it, nobody likes to budget, right? And I particularly do not have a set budget. I know what my limitations are in each side of these accounts, right? And so when the paycheck comes in, however that is, right? Monthly, quarterly, every so often, you have a baseline, because that's really what I want to accomplish for you, is to figure out what your baseline is. The baseline is, how much money do I need to live on to pay my fixed costs, and what is my variable spend? I can be flexible, right, with my variable spend. And so then I can set up some cushion for myself, right? In the months where I don't have enough income, right, coming in, or it varies, then I have a lot more freedom to make sure that all of the bills are paid and I'm not stressing out. Now, it is so much easier to set this up if you don't have variable income. If you just get your paycheck, it's consistent, that's awesome. It's pretty straightforward how you do that. It becomes a little more trickier when your income fluctuates, right? And so it is particularly interesting for folks who maybe have businesses or have side hustles on the side, which is very common these days. So how do you manage that? So anyway, I wanted to drop this by you today because it was on top of my mind. I'm getting ready for this presentation tomorrow, and I'll go in a lot more detail, so join me for the webinar. But I challenge you to think about, what are you actually doing in your day-to-day life to make sure that you have a system in place. You don't have to adopt my money flow system at all. You could use whatever system you have or whatever tools you have. Some of us like apps on our phones, right? I use Mint. Some of us like spreadsheets, and some of us don't like any of that. But how do you make sure that the baseline, right, of your financial life, because this is pretty much what we start with any client that shows up at our doors, is to figure out how much money you need to live on and have that baseline in place, because it starts to give you that freedom and ability to make decisions, not only of what is possible, what you can accomplish, right, what kind of goals you can set for yourself, but then what are your ability, right, from the financial standpoint. So think about it. Let me know if you have any questions. I will actually share a couple of slides tomorrow after the presentation, so make sure to check back in, and I will see you here again next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.